Hello there, this is Talking Europe on France 24. I'm Catherine Nicholson. Now, this week has seen some new Brexit flare-ups between the UK and France. We've also had the EU making tech trade deals with the United States and some Polish regions dropping their so-called LGBT free zone status. A busy week here in Europe, and on the line with us to discuss all of this and perhaps more, the European Commissioner for Justice, Didier Reynders. Thank you very much for joining us from Brussels, Mr. Reynders.
With pleasure.
Let's start off with another post-Brexit moment, I think we can call it, that we've had this week. The UK government attributing its post-Brexit fishing licences to non-British fleets, of course. Now, there's been a lot of anger here in France because just a handful of the French licence applications were actually successful. The UK government says it's acted in line with the Brexit agreements. The French Seas Minister, though, says the opposite. Do you see Westminster as playing politics with these fishing rights?
But we have had many problems, with UK since some times. Of course, first of all, with the Brexit, but that was a weird choice in the UK to decide about that. But we have asked to our British colleagues to have a good agreement and then to implement correctly the agreement. And so since some months, we have had many difficulties about a very correct implementation of all the agreements, about the fisheries, but also about Ireland, about many different other issues. And so here we are working with our French colleague to see how it's possible to reach a better agreement with a correct implementation of the Brexit solution that we have put into place.
Now, you mentioned that there have been various issues between the EU member states or the EU institutions and the UK. At the time of making the Brexit deal, the EU side and the British side said we want to remain close friends, have good relations. This really doesn't feel like it's gotten off to a good start, less than 12 months after Brexit became effective.
But we have already said that. I said with the withdrawal agreement, of course, if it's impossible to have a correct application, it's become to be a real problem of trust. And so hopefully it was possible to go to a better implementation of the withdrawal agreement. But now we have the same language about the Brexit agreement, if I may, because we need to be sure that it's possible to, of course, to defend the interest on both sides. It's logical, but in a correct way. And so we have seen difficulties in different fields, and certainly the last situation that we have seen with the agreement between the US, Australia and UK about the Indo-Pacific region was also an issue, because we are in the same alliance in the NATO. We are partners in many different actions in security and defense. And such an agreement without any contact or information with the European member states taking part in the NATO, to give an example, is very strange. So, of course, there are some difficulties in different ways, but we try to convince our partners that we are solid and robust partners. You know that we are working together with UK, like with other like-minded countries, in many different ways. And so I'm hoping that we will have the opportunity in the next months to reinforce our partnership, but we will continue to defend our own interests. You know that we want to build a real autonomic strategy, and we want to have a real strategy to be more autonomous at the European level.
Well, you mentioned there the political fallout from the so-called AUKUS alliance between Australia, the UK and US that was put together essentially behind Europe's back. There was movement this week in terms of tech trade cooperation between the EU and the US. But after all of this, can Europe still trust the United States?
Yes, of course. I said we are very good partners in different ways, but of course it was a shock to see such an evolution without any real contact with the European Union and the member states. And so it was needed to take some initiative to rebuild something like the contacts between the French president and the US president. But it's also a good signal that we need to go further with the strategic autonomy at the European level in different fields. We have proved that in the health sector. You have seen that we have invested in research and then development of vaccines, and we are the only one to provide vaccines to the rest of the world when it was impossible for the US to open the borders at the beginning of the pandemic. So, of course, we will continue to build our strategic autonomy in other fields, like in defense and security, like maybe also in the digital transition with the capacity to produce chips also at the EU level. So we are partners, but we need to think about a real adult partnership with a real defense of our own interest and a real strategic autonomy in the major issues that we have on the table. And on such a basis, it's possible to have a correct relationship with the US. We have many discussions for the moment with the US, and I'm sure there's the only one way to be sure that we need to, on both sides, to defend our own interest, but to try to see how it's possible to do in common and maybe to have an influence on the rest of the world.
Let's look back inside the EU now, something that falls under your justice remit. In Poland this past week, 3 of the municipalities that had declared themselves LGBT-free zones have given up that status. The European Commission has been threatening to block up to 126 million euros of funding to Polish municipalities over this issue of these zones. Justice Minister of Poland, though, says that the financial pressure is blackmail. What do you say back?
Well, first of all, we want to repeat that it's important to promote and defend the rule of law, the fundamental rights, and the democracy. And of course, when we are seeing in one of another member states discriminations against some kind of minorities due to the sexual orientation, to give an example, like you mentioned in Poland, it's very important for the Commission to react because we are sharing the same values, and it's very important to protect those values. And so we have said to those municipalities that it was impossible to continue to fund some policies with such a kind of discriminations. And so the pressure was very useful because we have seen a way back from different municipalities, and it's a good step in the good direction. But when we see the same situation, to give an example, in Hungary, with a new law, with also discriminations against the LGBTIQ community, we react. We have introduced an infringement proceeding before the Court of Justice, but we are discussing also about different kind of funds given to Hungary. And so, of course, it's very important to push pressure. It's just to be sure that it's possible to have full respect of the rule of law, the fundamental rights, and the democracy. And here it's very clear that there are discriminations when a municipality is saying that the municipality doesn't want to have LGBTIQ people on this territory. It's impossible to agree on this, so we need to react.
Bringing in Hungary, Viktor Orban, who's Prime Minister of Hungary, is intending to hold a national referendum early next year on legislation that limits schools' teaching about homosexuality, about transgender issues. Is this referendum compatible with EU values and with EU law?
The referendum doesn't change anything about our determination to act. And so we have engaged a dialogue with Hungary. We have said that we will go to the Court of Justice against the new law. And of course, it's possible to disagree with the Commission for a member state, but it's impossible to disagree with a binding decision of the Court of Justice. So we will use again, also with Hungary, all the tools at our disposal to try to fight against such a kind of discrimination. It's impossible in the European Union to have discrimination against people due to their sexual orientation, due to other elements also. And so it's very clear that we will use all the tools at our disposal. And with our result of referendum, it must be clear that we are sharing the same values, and it's impossible to put into place a discrimination about, again one of another minority.
And in terms of the tools at the Commission's disposal, could that include blocking a part of the EU COVID recovery fund money, which has not been paid out in full to all the member states at this point?
But there is a link between the Recovery and Resilience Plan and the country-specific recommendations that we have sent to the member states in the European semester. And of course, about the budgetary discussions. And of course, we ask to all the member states to implement. To give an example, in Italy, we have asked some reforms in the justice systems. And there are reforms, and they have voted in the Italian parliament, different reforms to try to have a pressure on the backlog in civil procedure, in criminal procedures. And in other member states, we are discussing about also different kind of reforms that it's possible to ask in the relation with the Recovery and Resilience Plan. We ask for digitalization of the justice system, but of course, in Poland, we ask to be in full compliance with the decisions of the Court of Justice about the independence of the justice system, or we ask to Hungary to put into place different measures to fight against corruption. So there's normal that we have a link between what we are recommending in the European semester to the different member states and the reforms that we are asking in the recovery and resilience plan. So we are till now in discussions with Poland or with Hungary about their plans.
And just very briefly, Michel Barnier, who negotiated Brexit for the European Commission, he wants to make a run at the French presidency. He said recently he wants to review France's freedom to manoeuvre regarding judgments of the Court of Justice of the EU, specifically in relation to immigration. Is that possible?
I was disappointed to see that in the comments because it was what we have said against UK during all the negotiations during the Brexit. But of course, there is an electoral process in France, so it's maybe a reason why we have seen some radicalizations in the different speeches and declarations. But in fact, about the migration issue, if there is a disagreement with the EU legislation now, we need to try to change the legislation. And it was the Commission is trying to do. We have put on the table a migration pact. And so it's not with a criticism against the Court of Justice that you will change something. The Court of Justice is applying the treaties, the Charter of Fundamental Rights, and the different rules also in the migration field. What is important is to come to the European Parliament, to come to the Council with the national government, and to try to change the rules. So I invite also the French government and other governments to come and to discuss with us about the migration pact. And you have seen yesterday we have put new elements on the table in the Council, at the Commission level, and I see that there are different actions also in the member states to try to change the rules. That's the real issue. It's not to have a criticism against the Court of Justice. It's more to change the legislation that we are implementing in the European Union.
Didier Reinders, that's all we have time for, but thank you very much for being with us on Talking Europe.
My pleasure.
And thanks to you as well for watching. Hope to see you in part 2 of the programme in a couple of minutes' time here on France 24.